Hello and welcome back to Bandits Ballads. 6 years ago, Balon Blacktyde crash-landed on the shores of Calradia with nothing to his name other than his fists, wits, and relentless lust for money and power. After many trials and tribulations, he has now become the leader of the biggest and baddest gang of brigands on the continent, even going as far as calling himself King of the Bandits. A meaningless title, thought the lords of Calradia, until the Ironborn conquered the former capital of the Khuzaite Khanate and made themselves right at home. With the throne of Makeb as the seat of my power, nobody can stop me from carving out my domain. Not after I consolidate my forces here. Until then, however, I have many foes to contend with, who all want to claim my new city for themselves, such as Mesui of the Khergit clan, who put together an army with a single purpose: to defend their capital. Because of my deadly efficiency, they have failed in that purpose, and now their new objective is to reclaim this city in the name of their Khan. Before they arrive, we have time to take care of some smaller yet very important matters. Throwing the lords I've captured into the dungeons, from where they cannot lead an army, selling the surviving enemy soldiers to the ransom broker, offloading half the food I'm hoarding into the market because the locals need it, and installing my Khuzaite companion, Bagbayar the Ragged, as the governor of this town. With one of their own in charge, the citizens should be a lot more loyal to their new ruler. I've even graciously donated 10,000 dinars to the city's coffers, to motivate the residents into working harder to improve its infrastructure. By the time I was done with all of that, Mesui's army arrived and began their siege preparations. All I could do was just wait for them to launch their assault, or set an ambush which would force them into doing so unprepared. But you gotta take them by surprise, otherwise it won't work, and right now, they're too alert for me to do anything of the sort. As I was waiting, I took notice of an approaching army of the Northern Empire that was even larger than the Khalasars, no doubt waiting its turn to have a go at my city. At least that's what I assumed before I saw the two armies clash from up on the battlements. Because the Canaanites were outnumbered, they obviously lost that battle, and some of my more enterprising men rushed out of the gates, grabbed the survivors, and dragged them to the dungeons. But with the imps roaming around, I couldn't leave my city just yet, or else I'd be leaving it completely undefended. So I took the time to introduce myself to some of the more important characters who take up space in my estate. Merchants, craftsmen, as well as the bosses of various criminal organizations. After they all swore fealty, I offered to buy their workshops and help them solve any issues that they have, such as freeing one of their associates from a bandit hideout. So I ordered the workshops to change their production into something that makes a bit more sense for our current location, and then took everyone towards that hideout, but along the way, I ran into the Imperial army that saved us from Mesui's horde. When they spotted my banners in the fields, they saw a chance to advance towards my capital and claim it for themselves, but I couldn't let that happen. So I marched my troops back home and decided to wait inside until the imps make their move. Despite being outclassed, our enemies pressed forth and began constructing their siege camp. That's strange. They may slightly outnumber us, but they need twice the numbers if they wish to breach my defenses.
Speak of the devil and he shall appear.
Alright, now I'm actually worried. One misstep and I'll lose everything I have built thus far. My city, my loot, and my army. Anyway, I allowed the Imperials to build their siege engines, as if I had any other choice. And when my scouts detected a moment of weakness within the enemy's ranks, we launched our ambush. The gates opened and together with my cavalry, we burst forth, rushing towards the enemy equipment intent on destroying it. After dealing heavy damage to their siege tower, I changed my focus towards the battering ram, but as I rode there, one of their soldiers stabbed me with his spear and dealt me a heavy injury, which would have been fatal were I not wearing this thick lamellar plate. Maybe not fatal, but if I got knocked out, there would have been no one left capable of leading the troops against the incoming attacks, and we'd have certainly lost. That's the misstep I was worried about, but it seems I'm still standing, and as long as I do, there's a chance we can actually win this thing. Very soon, however, their reinforcements arrived and I ordered my lads to retreat back to the city. I chose to stay behind for a little while longer and tried putting a few bolts into the enemy's ram before their archers arrived. Won't cause much damage doing that, but every little bit helps. Thanks to our successful ambush, the enemy was forced to assault my walls without their siege tower and with a heavily damaged battering ram. What surprised me most when the actual battle began was how well my soldiers organized themselves into the proper formations. I did need to shuffle some of their numbers around to ensure that all key positions are properly defended, but other than that, my intervention was not needed. Of course, I'd still have to be present for the battle itself to keep an eye on the entire operation and change course if I notice we're heading in the wrong direction, but until then, I can just let the men do their own thing and try to help out wherever I can. First order of business was paying attention to what my catapults were targeting. The battering ram is a higher priority target than the enemy soldiers because if our gate is breached, we'll have a harder time defending ourselves, whereas if we waste our shots on their troops, they'll only suffer some temporary injuries that'll heal before the next engagement. Fortunately, my companions were hitting the right target, so all I needed to do was take position at one of the murder holes and start shooting. Can't say I was too effective. I did land a few shots, but only one of them resulted in a kill, and before I could score another, the incoming ram was destroyed and the enemy decided to scale the walls with their ladders, and I went forth to shoot them down. They're easy targets when they climb. Before aiming for the lads on the ladders, however, I chose to shoot into the crowd and I was surprised to find out that I actually landed a critical injury to one of their lords, Belithor, but before I hit anyone else, I received the same treatment. Luckily, I wasn't needed for the rest of this fight. The enemy could only reach us via ladders and my positions were heavily fortified. All of those that reached to the top found themselves back at the bottom, and a lot worse for the wear. After a bit of raining, the imps saw the futility of their struggle and sounded the retreat, but that would not be the end of it. They simply ran back to the safety of their siege camp where they would attempt to regroup for another assault. Even so, I was impressed to find out that my companion, Athrar the Prince, scored 61 kills all on his own. Must be because he was operating a mangonel for the entirety of the fight. I barely got 2. But of the 569 enemies we've taken down, only 213 were killed and the Imperials brought 1,458 men. I hope they won't recover all the wounded troops before their next assault. Never mind. In the 2 days it took them to get ready for round 2, not only did most of their wounded make a full recovery, but they were reinforced by a fresh party of 170 battle-ready men, so we were back to square one. But we have a secret weapon: ambushes. Nobody else is able to do this. We can pull it off because we have extensive experience with raiding and sneaking around, and when done right, it makes a hell of a difference. Not only were we able to destroy a lot of the enemy's siege equipment, but also force them to attack us unprepared, and we were ready for round 2. This time I was sure my catapults were doing their job, so I didn't need to babysit them anymore. Instead, I turned myself into cover for one of my Fian champions and tried to protect him from incoming arrows while he was shooting. My efforts did help a little bit, but he still got hit every once in a while. Still, he kept doing his job without a complaint, even though he had 9 arrows sticking out of him. But when the 10th hit, that was it. Just as he fell, so did the enemy's battering ram, and I knew they would attempt to scale the walls by ladder. So I got to a good position where I'd be able to shoot the climbers while at the same time staying safe from incoming projectiles. I don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past. This time, things went a lot better for me, as not only did I stay awake for the entirety of the fight, but I managed to shoot down 15 enemies before they retreated. Not as many as my catapult operators, but still pretty good. In total, we got 274 kills in the second round. If we keep this up, we're going to win this thing. 1 day later, the enemy was ready for round 3. You know the drill by now. Ambush, damage their equipment, retreat to the city and force them to attack. We weren't able to destroy anything in our ambush, but by the time their siege tower rolled around, it was only being held together by hopes and dreams. One hit from my catapult was enough to shatter it to pieces, and not long after, their ram was demolished as well. Since their only way in was one set of ladders, the Imperials just gave up and scurried back to their camp, preparing themselves for another attempt. Insanity. I can already feel it approaching me as I describe this battle. On the fourth round, I scaled an archer tower and popped a few skulls, but after a while, I took notice that the approaching ram was still in one piece. Ramshackle, but still going. I aimed to correct that mistake. So I ran towards the gate as fast as I could, and on my way there, I picked up a bundle of catapult projectiles and lugged it with me, and just as I arrived to my destination, so did the gate breaker, and I heaved the rocks over the walls and hit the center mass of my target, dealing heavy damage. Not heavy enough to break it though, and my time was running short. There were no other rocks nearby for me to toss over the wall, so I had to make do with my crossbow. 3 more bolts was all it took to neutralize the threat before it bust my gate wide open. By now you already know what tends to happen at this stage. So I went into another archer tower overlooking the enemy's ladders and started shooting, and after hitting a few targets, the enemy ran back to safety, tails between their legs. A dozen more failed assaults like these and we'll finally claim victory. What I didn't tell you is that while the Imperials were getting themselves killed, trying to take my city, a Khuzaite force was standing nearby, waiting for them to make a mistake. Which they did, eventually. Assault after assault after assault significantly drained their forces, and even though most of the enemy's troops weren't dead, they were nowhere near ready for a fight, so as you can expect, the Dothraki pounced on them. When their numbers dwindled to manageable levels, I decided to sally forth and wipe them out myself, to claim the loot that is rightfully mine, not allow it to fall into the Khuzaite's hands. For this battle, I split my archers into 3 divisions. Basic bowmen would stand in the middle, behind the shield wall, crossbows to the left and Fians on the right. If push comes to shove, the last 2 groups can act as shielded and shock infantry respectively. As for the cavalry and horse archers, they were merged into a single cohesive unit to make it easier for me to command them. The Imperials, however, chose to stay on the defensive, so I needed to be the one making the approach. As such, I got my footmen a bit closer to the enemy lines and ordered my riders to follow me as I attempt to flank the hostile cavalry. From up on a hill, the skirmishers should have an easy time landing their shots, and if our foes close in, the melee cav will take care of them. In the meantime, I taught this sword sister the importance of wearing a helmet. That's a lesson she won't forget anytime soon. It didn't take long for the enemy horsemen to lose their composure and attempt to charge at us, but as expected, that didn't end well for them. With them out of the picture, I ordered my men to move into position for the final attack. Infantry in front, main archers on the small hill behind them, the crossbows occupied the hill on our right, and the Fians would advance on the enemy, basically getting in range, shooting their bows and walking backwards when our foes attempt to close in. At the same time, I ordered my riders to move behind enemy lines and keep a safe distance away from their archers. For now, they would just wait. Soon enough, my rangers began shooting and the Imperials started losing soldiers left, right and center, which prompted them to hopelessly charge at us. That was an even greater mistake than if they just stood their ground, because as soon as I saw them do that, I told some of my men to get closer to their targets. My main attack force was in front of our enemies, holding position and shooting them from the front. The crossbows were firing from their left, and my cavalry was harassing from behind. There's nothing the imps could have done to beat this maneuver. Best they could hope for was to deal a bit of damage before they finally lose, but I could not allow them to do that either. As soon as the infantry clashed, I told my main archer group to stop shooting and reinforce the front lines, and got the cavalry to charge from behind. As you can expect, this was an absolutely decisive victory. where we've defeated 463 enemies while merely losing 22 men. I wonder if these tactics would have a similar result against a greatly superior force. Guess it'll have to be put to the test, but ultimately it doesn't really matter. What matters is that the siege of Makeb has finally been broken after countless assaults. Actually, I can count them. It was 4, I think, plus this battle. Now I can finally breathe. Unless the Kuzeet army that showed up is feeling brave. Now I could have allowed them to deal with the Imperials and let them lose even more of their soldiers, but I chose to finish the fight myself for the loot, which wasn't worth it. This was the largest engagement I've ever survived, taking down well over 1400 Imperials, and yet the plunder was worse than anything I've gotten recently from smaller battles. Oh well, it is what it is. Other than the spoils, I've also claimed my surviving foes as prisoners of war. The nobles would be given generous accommodations in my luxurious dungeon, so they can take a break from all that tiresome warmongering, while their 600 soldiers fetched 35,000 dinars from the ransom broker. That was well above my prisoner limit, and if we had to travel, most of them would have escaped, but since I was in town, I could afford to take them all at once and quickly give them to the ransom broker before anyone broke free. After taking care of that, as well as some other business, I've decided I don't want the Kuzeet horde laying siege to my capital, so I took matters into my own hands and chose to attack them in the field. I could theoretically use the cliffs nearby as a meat grinder to crush their army while suffering very few casualties, but when I caught them, I've noticed that I don't have a favorable position, and when I realized that if we proceed, our victory would be costly, I've taken the decision to pull my forces back and return to the safety of our town. We're free to disengage if we're the attackers. While we're stationed inside, the Kuzeets won't dare to make a move, so they departed to besiege some imperial castle, but as soon as I left to defend one of my villages against raiders, the army made a 180 and set their sights upon Makeb. Before I could run back inside, they already set up their blockade and made preparations for a siege. But hope was not lost, because there was yet something I could do. Sacrifice a portion of my men to distract the attackers while I sneak most of my forces back inside the city and take an active role in defending it. I actually waited a bit before doing this. I wanted to be certain that my enemies were already committed to their assault because, you see, I only left behind 50 men in the local garrison while the enemy had almost 700. Under these circumstances, they did not need to bother building siege towers. They could have won with just a ram and basic ladders, if I did not intervene, but I did, and now, what they predicted to be an easy win is going to result in a crushing defeat, if we can prevent our gate from being busted open. Because one of my catapults preferred targeting the enemy soldiers instead of their approaching ram, I rushed to operate it myself, but I missed the first shot. And by the time I calibrated the second, my target was way too close for me to land a hit, so I chose instead to pick up one of the flaming oil barrels, planning to drop it on the ram when it gets into position. That moment never came, however, because when the enemy realized they're hopelessly outmatched, they sounded the retreat. Maybe one of their commanders losing her life had something to do with the sudden drop in their morale. And since I had more battle-hardened men than the Kuzeets, I sallied out of the city and met them in the field, where I could use the cliffs to do what I always do and claim an easy victory. Our position wasn't ideal. The breach we occupied was far larger and not as steep as our usual choke point. But given the fact that my army is stronger, the terrain shouldn't be much of an inconvenience. In order to capitalize on it, however, I placed most of my men into the passage, as standard procedure dictates, but kept the crossbowmen and the dismounted cavalry outside to lure the enemy to this position and prevent their flanking maneuvers. Soon as our foes close in, I will move these lads into the breach. When the Kuzeet horse archers attempted to execute their strafing run, they got obliterated by my crossbowmen in a matter of seconds, and the few that survived were forced to regroup with the rest of their mates. When I saw how easy that was, I just told my cavalry to run back to where they left their horses, intending to get them back in the saddle, just in case the enemy flanked us. But they didn't, instead they behaved as I predicted. So I ended up telling the cavalry to dismount once more and join the infantry in the front lines, while the crossbows moved behind their shield wall. From that point on, the battle proceeded just as all the others we've fought in similar terrain. The enemy tried to push through my impenetrable shield wall while arrows rained down on them, until their numbers dwindled to critical levels, after which every one of my lads was ordered to charge and kill everything in their path. By the end of it, we've defeated 386 enemies while losing a mere 33 men, claiming yet another decisive victory against the enemies of the Ironborn. As you know by now, the survivors were imprisoned, the loot was claimed, and then I've taken care of some smaller business in town, which included paying a visit to the tavern and hiring yet another companion, Hikara the Swift, a talented trader from the steppe. And since I was in a good mood from all our recent triumphs, I've taken a moment to rest and celebrate my accomplishments by dancing to the music that the bards were playing. It sounded pretty good. But there was still a lot of work to be done. More precisely, I needed to consolidate my power in Makeb by leaving behind a strong garrison that would prevent this city from being besieged every single time I go for a leisurely stroll outside its gates. For now, my companions' parties had to be disbanded and their soldiers stationed inside. When all is set, they will be reinstated as generals once more, but for now, they're back in my party. And since I needed to recruit a whole lot of people, I left the infantry home and took about 80 riders with me. Of course, we were slowed down by all the extra horses and loot we were carrying, so I had to stash those as well, but I had to be cautious. Because if my enemies bring a large army and manage to take this town, I'll lose my stored items as well. When I was done with that and got ready for another recruitment spree, I received an envoy from the Khalasar, promising to pay me a daily tribute of nearly 3,000 dinars if I make peace with them. Tempting. Unfortunately, they're in possession of a few castles that I want, so no. The envoy is lucky to keep his head. I then remembered that I had a job to do for one of the crime lords in my town. So I set course towards the hideout where his associate was being held hostage, but in my way, I ran into a group of 37 steppe bandits. Thanks to my speed, I easily caught them and extended them an invitation into my crew. With plenty of training and a large enough investment, these lads can become Khan's guards, so maybe I'll build my golden horde after all, call myself Call Balon. And just as they joined the gang, I noticed another group of 28, so I invited them too, and then conscripted some recruits from the nearby Kuzeit villages before finally making my way to the hideout and doing my job. I obviously am not doing this for the money. The 3,000 dinars I get is a drop in the ocean, but the reason I do it is because the more issues I solve in my town, the more loyal my citizens become, thus preventing a potential rebellion. There's many other benefits to earning the loyalty of your people. Faster construction, higher tax revenue, and more militia enlistment. So I will do all that I can to claim those benefits. As I was heading back to town to station some of the new recruits in its garrison, I noticed an army of 500 Imperials prowling around. Luckily, they did not dare approach Makeb, thanks to the men defending it, but their path led towards me. So I ran the other way and continued my recruitment efforts. When that was taken care of, I circled back to my capital, ordered all of my men to join the local garrison, and took all of the new recruits under my wing to gift them some of my spare loot and raise them up into proper soldiers. After doing so, I allowed these lads to return to the garrison while taking the horsemen back with me on another recruitment run, which wasn't wasn't entirely successful. With nothing else to do, I returned home one last time, stationed my cavalry inside and took as many elite footmen into my party as I could muster. With this area secured, I think it's time for us to claim new territory, but we'll leave that for the next chapter because this one is done. So, thank you for watching and I will see you next time. Goodbye.